And welcome back to the Julius Ceasar History Hour. Trevor here. So, this is episode 3, where we are diving into the community of Rome and also the human flourishments of one of the main characters in the book and Caesar's noble friend, Mark Antony, as he uprises the Roman citizens to stand against the conspirators. So, in the last episode, we talked about how Mark Antony, who wasn't involved in Caesar's assassination, but was tapped to speak at his funeral and was deemed a threat by Cassius, but Brutus said, this guy is perfectly cool. He goes into the funeral and gives a speech, and he basically undermines the conspirators in that speech and causes an uprising with the Roman citizens, where the Roman citizens are starting to, in terms of the community, they are starting to turn on the conspirators and turn on the senators that killed Julius Caesar. And then we also talked about how in scene 4, Octavius, and Lepidus formed the second triumvirate, which was the group that consolidated power within Rome to keep power the same, but also seek revenge against all of the senators who killed Caesar. And they actually ordered numerous executions of senators to be executed for their roles in killing their fallen friend and killing what could have been a reign of Julius Caesar in the Roman Empire. So now we are going to talk about the end of it. We're going to talk about Act 5. And in terms of Mark Antony's flourishment, this was a huge part of the book at the end, because we had the climax at the funeral, but now we have the final battle between Julius Caesar's friends, the second triumvirate, and Brutus and Cassius and the rest of the conspirator army. So, in scene 1, obviously in terms of the Roman Empire and Roman community, we have a political fallout between Rome and between its citizens and also the power holders, because with Caesar's death, there is now a split between having a state government and also keeping and bestowing the empire as it has been for centuries. And this ultimately leads to a military conflict. And this involves the militaries of the conspirators, which is led by Cassius and Brutus, who orchestrated Caesar's assassination and orchestrated the attack, but also we have the forces of the triumvirs, which is led by Mark Antony and Octavian. And then they end up meeting at Philippi, where they embark on a battle, and it is a very gruesome battle. It's a very impactful battle, because this marks not only the end, but it also marks, what is going to come for futures on end. So, as the battle goes, where we can talk about community in terms of Cassius and Brutus and also flourishing there. So, in the battle, all the forces of the conspirators are getting just clobbered in the war. They're getting slaughtered. They're getting killed off one by one. They got basically they don't stand a chance against Octavian and Mark Antony's armies. And this leads to Brutus and Cassius starting to second guess themselves and starting to get the full scope of what exactly they did at the end of scene 3 when they murdered Caesar. And what this ultimately leads for both of them. So, and starting with Cassius, Cassius has the idea of thinking that his lifelong friend, Titus, who is one of the conspirators that helped in the assassination, he was believed to have been kidnapped by the enemy forces. And what Cassius ends up doing is he gets the sword that he used to stab Caesar with, and he gets one of his soldiers to kill him, and he commits suicide that way. And in terms of Brutus sees Cassius dead from the suicide, and then he also takes a sword, another sword that was in Caesar's assassination and belonged to Caesar, and stabbed himself and had himself be stabbed as well to death. And they both committed suicide in terms of that. And in terms of the flourishing, they were able to orchestrate, something big like this assassination, and they were able to understand things that could have been associated with it. But also, they began to question themselves. They began to start to understand the whole scope of what exactly they did, and they started to have regrets of it. They started to have second thoughts about it, and this led to what we see over time in it. And then, in terms of the community, the enemy forces of the conspirators, they celebrate the victory. Mark Antony and Octavian are seen celebrating with their forces with the victory, but the victory is also marred because Mark Antony and Octavian, not only were they allies, but they were also rivals as well. And this ended up growing a rivalry with Octavian in terms of power because of the uneven balance. And then Antony, after this war, he begins to have the same thing that they said Caesar had. He was getting more power hungry, and he had more desire to get more power, which ultimately, in terms of the book and in terms of it foreshadows an eventual struggle between both of them for the control of Rome, because they were both made, the rulers of Rome after this. And with that tension on the throne, it sparked what we could see, down the road in a bunch of other centuries. What's next for the Roman Empire? And that's what we're starting to see. We're starting to see the foreshadowing of that future struggle. And then, in terms of what we talked about human flourishing, humans, flourishing in different things, the community wouldn't be able to flourish in that environment just because, they've lived in that environment for so long. But also, it's the fact that Mark Antony is starting to show signs of what Caesar once was, and it begins to spark a question of, was this a good idea to kill Caesar? And with him wanting more power, and it's going to lead to a struggle, it's going to lead to a rivalry with Octavian, and it's going to lead to bigger problems down the road. And at the end of the book, we're seeing that in terms of the community of Rome and what we've talked about in Rome, tying into it, this Rome community is starting to have not only the same question that they were having when Caesar was killed and Mark Antony gave a speech, but also they're going to see more struggle. They're going to see more power struggle, and then there's going to be basically a division between what's more important, an empire or a state government control. And with Antony and Octavian in power, it becomes clear that it's going to be, again, a struggle. And then after his death, in terms of what we're seeing in terms of Mark Antony's flourishing, as I said, I got my notes here. It says, we talk about the loyalty and manipulation of it. Mark Antony was initially loyal with Caesar, and then he was very manipulative after his death to give a speech to incite the crowd, incite the Roman citizens, and go against the conspirators. And then he also had ruthlessness with it, and he was very, very ruthless with his alliance with Octavian and Lepidus, and his involvement in the purges that were going on with war after Caesar's death. And then we also see political ambition as well. We see his rivalry grow, and then after Caesar's death, it's gonna foreshadow like a future. What could happen is a future civil war between Octavian and Mark Antony down the road, if it comes to that, because it's gonna lead to not Mark Antony being the first emperor of Rome, but it's gonna lead to Octavian being the first emperor of Rome. And as we see in that, so Mark Antony was able to go from an ally to a master manipulator to avenge Caesar and also be a loyal person as well. And that's a huge thing that we see and a huge difference with it. So, the key takeaways for Rome and the key takeaways for Mark Antony. Let's get with the Rome and how community grows. This community went from being normal with the empire to being insightful and having a civil war and basically an anarchy and a riot after Caesar's death, and now there's going to be growing tension within it. So it went from being great to bad to on the verge of future conflicts. And in terms of Mark Antony, we're seeing that he flourished once he got the victory over, but he also struggled as well with his own power and ambition. And that's like a period of, he's not really flourishing in terms of the power. And we're definitely seeing that a lot as well. So, those are just key takeaways with it. As I said, Mark Antony is a huge character in this book. He does a lot of different things, as we saw, and then also it's important to detail Rome before and after Caesar's death to truly understand what the future holds for the Roman Empire. All right, that is it for today's episode. I will catch you in the next one.